Welcome back, guys. Or if you're new to my channel, this is Automotive Anonymous, and that's the H2 Hummer. It's actually a really clean example. It's selling for less than $19,000. It has under 100,000 miles and some tasteful upgrades, but it's not perfect. So today we need to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and answer the age-old question of, is this still the most embarrassing vehicle that you can drive? Or has it actually aged quite tastefully, and now might be the time to pick one up? Anyways, guys, you can expect to see a walk around, all the specs, initial driving impressions, 0 to 60 on GPS, and then my final thoughts of the huge H2 Hummer. And huge thanks to Twin Falls Chevy for letting me borrow this one for the day. I'll link them below if you're interested because they sell below MSRP and they ship all over the country. And with that said, let's dive right into this review. And if you guys like Hummer, the H2, or my video, please be so kind to consider liking my video. Basically, that lets me know you want to watch more stuff like this. It does help the video get shared, and it helps you by having YouTube choose to show you more stuff like this. Thank you so much. But if you're new to the Hummer nameplate, you actually need to know that that used to be its own brand. Now it's just a model off of GMC, but the Hummer used to be a brand, and the H2 is a model, which came into existence in part because of Arnold Schwarzenegger, not the Terminator version, but the Governor version back in the day. So for the 7 or 8 years that these were produced, Hummer actually only sold about 153,000 of them, which is unfortunate. It is an enthusiast vehicle. There is a reason why you don't see very many on the road today. And in part that is because it is kind of a behemoth. It doesn't get the best gas mileage, and year after year more of them are ending up in accidents and junkyards, being parted out, all the things that typically happen with vehicles as fewer and fewer on the road. So it is actually pretty rare to find such a clean example that's less than $20,000. But when these were coming out, in 02, 03, this was a $48,000 MSRP vehicle before extra options and goodies. In today's money, that's over $80,000. So it's really not that far off from the Hummer EVs of today, which kind of explain also why not as many people bought them. It is off of a Tahoe chassis that has been extended and raised up a little bit to meet the demands of the ground clearance needed by the Hummer. But a Tahoe version of this started at $32,000, so the Hummer was a 50% premium over a regular Tahoe, just for the base MSRP, and there's really a lot of reasons, especially around the recession, why not many of these actually sold. But these are by no stretch of the imagination a monstrosity. Just look at how it barely even fits into an average size parking spot, and that's with it only being about 16 feet long, which is actually not that long of a vehicle, but it's 6 3/4 feet wide, almost 6.5 feet tall. It does weigh about 6,400 pounds. This one can tow about 7,000 pounds. And the payload sticker is gone, so I will overlay on the screen what these apparently are rated for online, even though the stickers are usually a lot lower than the numbers you find online. So maybe subtract a few hundred pounds from this number right here. Anyways, it has 9.5 inches of ground clearance, although unfortunately these running boards take away a little bit of that ground clearance. And then with its 16-foot length, it has a 10-foot wheelbase, so it actually feels really planted and stable on the road. For being such a big, heavy vehicle with a high center of gravity, I'm actually surprised at how pleasantly it drives. And then it has a 4:10 final drive ratio, and it can do a full circle in about 44 feet. And then the last few things to mention here is the gas door is located right here on the driver's side. It is locking, so the bumps aren't going to siphon any of your 32 gallons of fuel. And then this is rated for 10 in the city, 14 on the highway. It has a 34-inch tire. This one currently is wearing a Goodyear Wrangler, and it's a 315/70/17 from the factory, and it does have air suspension and a pretty high raised frame underneath that you guys can see. But the key is unfortunately just a cheaped out regular GM truck key. I really wish GM spent the extra $5 to make it Hummer specific, but it's unfortunately not. And then this does come from the era of having a locking door, so you can either unlock it with that key that you're gonna have to use for the ignition, or you can use the buttons on the remote. But things start to get really interesting as we open up the door of the Hummer. First of all, look at how short the window is. It does have the rain guard, which is a pretty cool feature, and there really isn't a lot of road and wind noise driving this around, but you do have a combination of old Chevy truck materials, kind of a door card that's kind of a cloth setup. You have some setups right there for the memory seats. You have some power controls for the switchgate. You have the handle to open up the door, big beefy handle, incandescent light, Bose speaker, which is a nice upgrade on this, and then a full-size door pocket for all of your snacks and your goodies when you're driving your 440 miles of range in the Hummer. Otherwise, the running board kind of takes away from the ground clearance. You do have kind of a rock rail above it, so it's kind of an interesting design how they went about doing this. And then Hummer is big and plasticky on the door sill, also plasticky up here, and then really well-aged you know, floor mats. They actually look like they've held up better than I expect. Hummer's basically faded out of them though. And then you have the hood release, which I'll show you how to open that soon. You have the old school parking brake, and then to unengage it, instead of just kicking it in further and letting it recoil, you actually have a release right there. Rubberized pedals. These are some of the extra controls you have on your Hummer. Ventilation, big A-pillar handle, and no sunroof or anything on this one, but it does have leather seats. They are powered, there's bolstering for days, and there is lumbar support, so it's pretty cool to be sitting in there. But unfortunately, the steering wheel is not tilting and telescoping, and the horn is kind of high-pitched, kind of silly when you look at the exterior of this thing. So I do think GM should have spent another $5 there to make it a little bit deeper, less high-pitched horn. Anyways, I'm going to turn the headlights off. You can see the gauges right there. There's really not a lot of information you can go through the display. There's no soft limiter, so it arrives pretty much to redline. And it sounds fantastic, this old 6-liter engine. Anyways, there's not really any storage above the dashboard. There is a compass, and you have tons of stuff that you can hide in the ceiling up here. Pretty cool. You also have some lighting. You have this aftermarket screen, which is actually integrated really well. And we go into reverse. Unfortunately, there's no backup camera that's been added, but you do have kind of like a sonar, kind of like you're pretending to be a bat, and you have signals that you can send off the front and the rear with the sensors installed so that you know if you're about to hit something. Otherwise, this is your backup camera right there. And then you have the old school shifter, which actually does remind me a lot of my old FJ Cruiser. This is 4-wheel drive all the time, so 4, you can go into neutral and then lock it into 4 high or 4 low, and you have a rear locking diff. So if you do take it on some extreme off-roading, that is nice to have. A front locker would be cool too. Otherwise, physical climate controls, a couple 12 volts down there. You can see some of the wiring in the add-on, some cup holders. Center console, yeah, it's okay. There's CD holders down there as well. You can hide a little bit of stuff up there, maybe your wallet or something. But overall, it's actually a pretty cool place to be, and you have these fold-down armrests for you and your front seat passenger. Anyways, let's turn it off and I'll hop in the back. The back of the Hummer you'd expect to be huge, but starting out, the door panel is about the same size as the front. The window is basically identical as well, and it actually opens up well enough that you could get a car seat in here. You could climb in if you're maybe a little bit heavier set individual, or if you just need a little bit more room to get in, that is fine too. You can also load quite a bit of stuff in here because it is at least about as roomy as this generation of Tahoe. Otherwise, the door panel, it all looks the same. You have the B-pillar, and then this is your big bench seat. You have a tiny bit of storage technically that you can put under there if you don't fold the seats down, a little bit under the driver and the passenger front seat. But climbing up into this thing, which honestly, these back seats don't look like they've ever really been used. At 5'11", I actually have a pretty good amount of room in front of my knees. I have a mat pocket, so I can be a backseat driver. I have about that much room above my spiky hair. Ventilation, plugins, non-existent other than the 12 volts. And then you have some storage down there in that big center console. And this, kind of like a real Humvee, does have kind of a raised floor. It's kind of a squatty interior. It's not as tall. So you do fit, you know, snugly in here, and that your hip is lower than your knee. But that's just the style of this, and to have the extra ground clearance. Otherwise, I'm curious to see if this folds down. It does, but it doesn't have a tunnel through, but you do have some cup holders, some storage, and then you do have a third row back here, which is pretty cool. Anyways, let's hop out and I'll show you the back. The back of the Hummer actually looks pretty interesting. It's riding on the factory height currently. You can raise the suspension, but you can just tell how big and top heavy this thing is, which it's surprising how good it drives. You do have Hummer ingrained into the back. You have these big shackles right here, your recovery points, your 7,000-pound hitch rating. And then you have some taillights that are kind of like the new generation of Hummer EV, but you have these weird loafers on the back that are fake. It shortens the window. It doesn't look like there's a spot where you can pop the glass like you could on my FJ Cruiser. And this handle right here, which I don't know why it's chrome, but it feels cheap. It feels like it's gonna break off, honestly. And then it lifts straight up, and I don't see a full-size spare tire on this one. I was kind of expecting it to be on the back, or kind of expecting it to be underneath, but with the shorty 16-foot length of this, I'm just not seeing it. Otherwise, back here, there's a lot of storage capacity, but it's a full-size frame, so what do you expect? This should be 40 cubic feet without this third row, and when you drop the seats, you have over 80 cubic feet. So it is pretty decent, but remember, it would be more if the floor wasn't so raised up for the suspension. I'll overlay on the screen where the full-size spare tire is. Looks like a tire changing jack right there. And you have a little bit of storage on this side with an inflator kit. So that's pretty cool. You can also lock and unlock the vehicle from back here and then use the strap to pull it down when you're ready. And after 21 years, I think those shocks are still doing a pretty good job. But if you're the lucky duck who gets to ride shotgun in the Hummer, are you gonna be embarrassed sitting up here, or are you gonna be having a good time? Well, basically everything on your entryway looks about the same, minus some of the switchgear. You still have power controls, which for the equivalent of $80,000 back in the day, you dang well better have power controls. And then you have actually a pretty good amount of storage. I think the transmission does impede a little bit of that, kind of like on some other vehicles from back in the day. Kind of a rattly glove box, but there's probably enough storage in it. It doesn't look like it has more storage up top other than that little tray right there, but not a second glove box like a lot of the modern trucks have. But anyways, guys, it's time to come around to the front. We're gonna pop the hood. We're gonna poke fun at these plastic moving around handles, which are not actually for a helicopter to deliver this to a battle zone. These look like they'll pop off pretty easily. But let's snap our fingers, pop the hood, and see what it has to offer. So under the reverse style opening hood, which actually is kind of front heavy with the bar on the front, so it really kind of folds down fast and you need to be careful, you have a 6-liter Vortec engine from the HD trucks, which makes 316 horsepower, 5,200 RPM, and 360 whopping pound-feet of earth-twisting torque at 4,000 RPM. Otherwise, you have the battery right here, you have fuse boxes, you have the alternator, the serpentine belt, your oil fill, your oil dipstick. Let's come around to the other side of this behemoth's hood. That's a long walk. You have a really good looking air induction box. It's an Aeroaid, so it's actually aftermarket unless for some reason these came factory with those back then. You can see just how easily the previous owner swapped out the light bulbs on this. Super easy, they're right there. That would take like a second to swap out. You have just 2 wiper blades on the front of this one, but it's a Vortec engine, which is very reliable. It'd be easy to supercharge this thing. It would be easy to swap it out for a bigger engine, which the later years of the Hummer did come with a 6.2 liter apparently, which is one of my favorite engines. But anyways, let's put the hood back on and take it for a drive. Initial driving impressions of the H2 Hummer is honestly, when I first got into this thing, I liked it a lot more than I was expecting. It feels very much like the old 07 FJ Cruiser I used to have. There's a lot of square and round shapes in here. It's huge. The windows are very short, vertical. They're not really that big, but visibility is surprisingly better than you'd expect, especially with these huge HD truck-sized side mirrors. You actually can see out of this thing really well, and because it's actually not exceptionally long, you can see right down the center rear view mirror as well. I do wish the wheel was telescoping. It's not. It can adjust a little bit, and those gauges look pretty nice too, just like a lot of other old school Chevy trucks. But there's just a lot of character to this thing. It's actually a lot funner to drive than I was expecting. And at about a 5'11", 190 pound frame, I'm actually really comfortable in these 20-some-year-old leather seats. They hold me into place pretty well, but if you do try to take a corner, first of all, the vehicle is going to remind you that physics is going to be working against you, so you're really not going to be sliding out of your seat too bad. And there's just so many interesting bits to this. Obviously, it has the upgraded infotainment system, which probably is a huge upgrade in reality, but because this thing weighs, 3 tons and then some, it's not going to handle super well. It's not going to be like a sports car, but it's actually better than I was expecting, and it's better than some of the modern Silverados I've driven. Sure, this does have an airbag suspension type of a lift or an air suspension setup, kind of like the new Hummer EVs, but overall, it actually really reminds me of my FJ. I'm enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would, but you do feel like a big old behemoth going down the road. It's super wide, super tall. I'm probably sitting up with my head position at least as high as I would be standing, so when I do come across little sedans and small CUVs, they do feel fairly small. But honestly, after 20-something years, the 6-liter engine in this, it purrs nicely. The 4L60 actually is doing a better job than I was expecting. It's shifting really smooth, and with only about 99,000 miles, and this being about an $18,000 example, less than a quarter of what it costs a new equivalent, this is a pretty good deal. Let's see how it handles this bump. Okay, so the 35s and the suspension, you still feel it about as much as a modern crossover. But honestly, this is a pretty cool ride, and I am so glad that I finally got to drive the Hummer H2. But let me get to the private road. We'll do a 0 to 60 and we'll see how fast this thing is. 0 to 60 in the H2 Hummer. Density altitude is about 3,000 feet, so it is down on power about 10%. We're just going to leave traction control. It's going to stay on, and I'm just going to go off of idle because I don't necessarily trust the 4L60 in a 20-year-old Chevy truck. Anyways, let's see what it can do. True 0 to 60 came in actually pretty impressive at 10.52 seconds. That was a little bit faster than I was expecting, to be honest. My final thoughts of the H2 Hummer is, first of all, I'm really thankful that I finally got to drive such a clean example. There have been a few H2s in the past that I had the opportunity to, but none of them were this clean, and none of them I thought deserved a video. This one has a lot of love, a lot of care, and some upgrades that are tasteful, in my opinion, that have been put onto it. It has modern headlights, a modern infotainment screen, and it still has all the charm of an old school Hummer. But is it still the most embarrassing vehicle to drive? In the days of the Cybertruck, the new EV, you know, the Pontiac Vibe, which has basically come out during the end of its reign right here with the GM recession and everything, there have been a lot of embarrassing vehicles that have come out. This one is no exception. Honestly, you kind of wonder, what is the ego, what is the personality type of someone who would drive such a behemoth? But as it's aged, it's been, 7-8 years since Doug's video. It's been 20 years since the inception of this. I actually think it is tastefully aging, especially if you can find a clean example. Sure, this has a lot of gimmicks. It has fake ventilation all over it. It has the fake hood, straps or the hood anchors, for a helicopter. It has a lot of other silly, interesting things that GM decided when they put this together. But is it unique? Heck yeah. Does it stand out in a crowd? Heck yeah. Is it head and shoulders above a lot of other vehicles? Sure. Is GM making a lot of cool vehicles like this anymore? No, they're not. They're not making things that are this unique, this specialized, in some cases less practical. And for that, I think this is going to age really well. And I personally don't know how this vehicle is going to go down in value much more. So if you want it, check out Twin Falls Chevy. If you got anything out of my video, please consider liking my video. Comment your thoughts and opinions below. Do you think this is going to age well for the next 10 years? Do you think it's hit rock bottom pricing? What are your thoughts on the Hummer? Have you ever owned one? Do you want one? Why are you watching this video? Where do you live? What's your mother's maiden name? I want to know all of that and more. So comment below. Otherwise, I wish you guys the best. I hope you take care, and until next time, see ya.